Welcome to Watchtower History.
March 1938. Hitler's troops crossed the Austrian border. Soon, the witnesses would be forced underground in country after country. Key organizers, Erich Frost, Arthur Winkler, and others, put their lives on the line for their fellow believers as they tried to keep one step ahead of the Gestapo.
As everybody knows, we had the hardest work and suffered the hardest in the concentration camps. We were starved. The labor exceeded our strength, and the harassment was often unbearable. So, as usual, I wanted to find a way to build up the brothers. We had such a fine unity there in the Sachsenhausen camp. I felt moved to compose a song that we could sing together for our mutual encouragement. Every morning we marched to the construction site of a sewage plant in Oranienburg. Our labor group consisted of about 40 brothers under the strict watch of the SS. While marching, my mind went back and forth and gradually a melody formed. That's how the music was developed. But how could the verses enter the camp without being able to write them down? I found a few brothers who helped me. I repeated the first verse to one of them until he knew it by heart, either while marching or while driving the wheelbarrow at work. I told the second verse to another brother, still to others, the third and the fourth. In the evening, I asked each of the brothers to recite his verse. That's how the song came to life. In the mornings, when the 40 of us were marching through the streets of Oranienburg, we already felt worn out. When one started humming that melody, the entire labor group trembled with excitement. We had to control ourselves to not break out loud singing. That would have been dangerous, of course. They would have brought us back to the camp and severely punished us.
Schuldlos im Kerker der Freiheit beraubt, spottend erheben die Feinde das Haupt. Sie möchten uns gerne regieren, sie möchten uns gerne regieren. Wir hören an jedem Ort nur unseres Königs Kommandowort. Nur er kann doch sicher uns führen. Nur er kann doch sicher uns führen.
As we sat together in the evenings and someone started humming that melody, quite a number of us sang along. And we rejoiced. Our eyes were shining. This gave us new courage and hope. We also had evenings of worship. Talks were given, and we had copies of the Watchtower that we studied together. So we were able to have some real times of peace and special encouragement and felt uplifted by that song.
Zeugen Jehovah's unverzagt, ist heiß auch das Ringen, tobt wild die Schlacht. sind hart auch die Bande, die Fesseln schwer, doch mächtig der Arm, der euch decket. Zeugen Jehovah's im Feindesland und fern von der Heimat, vom Liebsten verbannt, hebt auf eure Blicke zu dem des Hand, für euch ist schon ausgestreckt.
Brother Frost, who was one of the anointed, finished his earthly course in 1987. After World War II and 9 years of imprisonment, he served as the overseer of our branch office in Germany for 10 years. This was before the arrangement was instituted of having a branch committee oversee the work. The very descriptive paintings that you saw in this segment were painted by a brother who was imprisoned in a concentration camp similar to the one Brother Frost was in. And I'm sure you recognize the song. You can find it in our songbook, though the tune is a little different. When Brother Frost found out that his song had been included in it, he was overjoyed and said, "My clumsy lyrics were transformed into 3 wonderful verses." If you turn to Song 17 in your songbook, you'll find the song originally composed by Brother Frost, "Forward, You Witnesses."
So Erich Frost reported the following about this hymn. He says, "Forward, you witnesses, this is our heart's desire, even then, though we were performing hard labor in a concentration camp. Well, there's a story about Erich Frost, and we'll get into Erich's story, a little bit more of the details surrounding his story in that future discussion. But the reason we bring it up here is he wrote one of the famous songs of the Jehovah's Witnesses, "Forward, You Witnesses." And in this article here, in the March 15th, 1988 Watchtower, it says, "Firm and determined in this time of the end, prepared are God's servants and the good news to defend. Though Satan against them is vaulted, in God's strength they keep on undaunted." And these are the opening lines of song number 29 in the songbook of the Jehovah's Witnesses, "Sing Praises to Jehovah." And what they wanted to say here is that this melody was composed in a concentration camp in Germany. A composer's mind is always humming with various melodies, so the song's music had been in my head a long time. The labor group I belonged to, consisting of 40 witnesses, had a half-hour march every day to a sewage plant outside the camp. En route one morning, the thought occurred to me, it's time to put some lyrics to the melody so that it can be sung. And soon the first verse began taking form in my mind. So in 1936, he was put in charge of the underground work of the persecuted witnesses of Jehovah in Germany. And he did well in that assignment for 8 months until he was put in a concentration camp. And we'll get more into his story and what happened. You know, there's some documents where you can actually see his arrest and a statement that he signed. We'll get into that story in the future here.
I
Stay
laugh
tuned.
because I know a former Jehovah Witness who he joined some Adventist groups, some group, I don't know, Lutheran, whatever, but they still sing the old songs. And we were laughing, I talk about, because they're dirges back then. And he laughs. You know, what's funny about it is even though he doesn't like what he came from, he loves the Jehovah Witness songs, and he wished that the new church would sing the Jehovah Witness songs, which is funny. And they are pretty lively compared to, you know, the dirt, you know, the old fashioned, you know.
Come on, I like some of the old hymns. I like Amazing Grace. That's one of my favorite ones. But anyway, Frost continues his story in the Jehovah's Witnesses in the Nazis book. It says, "The inmates worked hard clearing the woods on the site and laying down the foundations, and during the night they were locked up in a neighboring town jail while they're singing this song that he's composing, you know." So the 1974 yearbook is talking about the different responsible ones that were over the work in Germany. And there's an interesting story here that's mentioned. Brother Klo, who we had talked about earlier, he tells us about those exciting days in Berlin, as it's described here. He says, I was looking forward to the Lucerne Convention. I had good chances of being able to attend since I had already been able to obtain a Swiss visa. But before I wanted to go to Leipzig to discuss organizational matters with Brother Frost, whose territory I was to take over as a regional service director, since an opening had come about through Brother Paul Grossman's arrest, I was unable to reach Brother Frost. However, and where I had expected to meet him, I was met by the Gestapo instead. I was completely numb at first, for just as I was able to start such a gratifying service, I was to be torn away from association with my brothers and taken by the Gestapo to Leipzig, and from there he was taken to Berlin. So he was supposed to meet Brother Frost, and he gets caught by the Gestapo. Instead of meeting Frost there, he meets the Gestapo. How did the Gestapo know he was going to be there?
Did Frost turn him in and traitor on him?
Okay, all right. So let's see here. Let's go a little bit further on here. A few days later, 5 officers armed with loaded pistols suddenly appeared, told me to put on my civilian clothes, and led me to the place near the goldfish pond, where Brother Vadun rented his garden chairs. They did not suspect him as being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, however. No, I was to serve as bait for my brothers, who would eventually show up for the planned meeting about which the Gestapo had now got information. How did they get the information? I had scarcely sat down, or I was told to, before I saw our sister Hildegard approaching me. She had wondered why I had not come to them since I had been expected, and she now wanted to see why I had not come. Since my festering shins were very painful due to the blows I had received, the officers did not suspect anything when I suddenly bent over, grimacing with pain, just at the very moment she was passing by, on the other side of the path, and attempting at the same time to signal to her with my eyes that the Gestapo were in the zoological gardens. She understood. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like the Gestapo asked him to turn in his members, to try and use them as bait to bring him in. Is that what it sounds like to you?
Okay, I'm gonna defend him. They told him, they arrested him, told him, they put him in that situation. And when Sister Hildegard came, he signaled with her eyes, "Hey, something's wrong here." Okay, so
he's trying to protect her.
Yeah, we're going to defend the guy. Okay, after reading it a couple times, I'm on that.
But he was still there as bait. He knew he was going to be there as bait.
Yeah.
Right? So he knows he's going to be there as bait, but he does try and protect the sister. So there's 2 sides to this story that they're printing here. She understood, hesitated for a second, and then just returned to Brother Vadun, whom she informed of this new situation. This meant the greatest danger for Brother Winkler, who actually did come shortly thereafter, and unsuspectingly seated himself on an empty chair. Very shortly, Brother Vadun approached him, asked for payment of the chair rent, and at the same time warned him of the Gestapo agents in the gardens. Brother Winkler soon rose, leaving his briefcase behind, and escaped as it appeared through the ring of Gestapo agents. I found out later that late that night, he appeared at Brother Cassing's apartment, where a group of Gestapo agents waiting for him immediately took him into custody. So they're everywhere. They know all the places they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So within a few days.
And did they get? Did I read that right? Did they get the briefcase? It says he left.
He left it behind. He left it behind.
So they must.
Unless that brother took it. It doesn't say, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was trying to figure out. Okay.
Yeah. For them, it doesn't seem like that's the important part of the story, but it seems like everywhere they're going, this Gestapo's already there. Jehovah's Witnesses are involved in the story. So within a few days, at least half of the regional service directors, along with thousands of other brothers and friends, had been arrested. This includes Brother George Barr, who reports, Every evening at about 10 o'clock, I would hear prisoners being taken from various cells. Shortly thereafter, I'd hear them being beaten downstairs in the basement. I heard their cries and their sobs. Every evening, when I heard the cell doors being opened, I would think, now it's my turn. But I was not bothered until finally on the fourth or fifth day, around 6 o'clock, when I was called to be questioned. This time it was an SS man who directed me into his room and told me to sit down. Then he said, "We know that you could tell us more than you want to." He stood up, picked up a pencil that he sharpened on the edge of a wastepaper basket, and continued his little speech. "I won't make it difficult for you. Come here." He asked me to step over to his desk, showed me several typewritten pages, and let me read them. It was a list of all the traveling servants in Germany with my name at the bottom. I read the names of the congregations we had visited, as well as the names of the brothers there. In black and white, I read how many pieces of literature, phonographs, and records we had ordered. Also, contributions and other monies we had turned in were listed. I could hardly believe it. Here, our entire underground organization lay in the hands of the Gestapo. Truly, I needed a few minutes before I could completely grasp the situation. Where had the Gestapo been able to get a hold of these records? I asked myself. Had my own activity not been accurately listed, I would have doubted the report's veracity. The Dresden Gestapo man, Bauch, who was conducting the hearing, gave me time to collect my thoughts. I'm afraid I must have had a rather stupid look on my face when I sat back down. He then said, "Now really, there's no reason to remain silent." For months the thought tormented me as to where the Gestapo could have got a hold of our records. Later I found out that all our orders, reports, and monies that we had turned in had been carefully kept track of in a file kept in Berlin, and later this was found and confiscated by the Gestapo. So again, how did the Gestapo get some of these records, or even some of the names of these people? How did they know? How were they there at every single turn? This is Erich Frost telling his story. God. All right. So he says specifically here, the Gestapo knew of our plan to meet that Friday for the memorial, but they didn't know where. More than once, they beat me into unconsciousness, then poured water over my head to revive me. Soon I was unable to lie down or sit. From Friday to Monday, I hardly ate or drank. So he says specifically here, the Gestapo knew of our plan to meet that Friday for the memorial, but they didn't know where. More than once, they beat me into unconsciousness, then poured water over my head to revive me. Soon I was unable to lie down or sit. From Friday to Monday, I hardly ate or drank, but kept calling on Jehovah for the sake of the brothers. When brought before the Gestapo gang again, I thought of Daniel in the lion's den. Their angry flood of words revealed what I was anxious to hear. The police dragnet had failed to catch the brothers. My joy was indescribable. So this is March 27th, 1937. This other story is August 28th, 1936. All right. How did they catch Frost? And who else is involved here? In Hesse's book, Dietlif Garbe, who's also the author of the other book, has an article here that says, in order to cast doubt on the steadfastness of Jehovah's Witnesses under the Nazi regime, apart from the Wilmersdorf Convention, reference is frequently made to the leadership members Frank and Frost, who were said to have betrayed their fellow believers to the Gestapo. The expose published in 1961 by Der Spiegel, was explicitly slanted to certain interests for the purpose of denigrating the former manager of the German branch office and the former editor responsible for the German editions of Watchtower and Awake. Historical facts were distorted in the way that Watchtower Society is often accused of doing. Frost's persecution was described by Der Spiegel in the following words, and here's the quote. Following interrogations by the Gestapo, Frost was allowed to exchange his prison cell for forced labor in Emlandsmoor, was released and later temporarily in Sachsenhausen concentration camp during the war, then finally landed in a construction brigade offshore from France on the rocky island of Alderney. What cynical language was allowed and temporary. Not only were the notorious Emlens camp depicted here as harmless and continuous concentration camp internment of Frost until the end of the war was denied, Alderney was a satellite camp of the Nurgam concentration camp, but history was openly falsified. The alleged release from the Gestapo refers to a customary release after serving a judicially ordered sentence after 1937 and for non-recanting JWs, and their subsequent remand or transfer to concentration camps. In fact, Frost had not spent one single day in freedom after his arrest on March 21st, 1937. But if I look at that quote, is that what it's saying to you? This is my question. It says Frost's persecution, he's saying they're misconstruing the history. He's saying Frost was allowed to exchange his prison cell, right? And he's claiming here that they depicted it in the article as harmless, a harmless concentration camp. I don't see that in that sentence, do you? That doesn't seem harmless to me, just he was transferred from one camp to another camp. He seems to be attributing something to them that's not in the statement that he's quoting. I think he's misconstruing the situation. Garvey is.
Mm-hmm. No, there was nothing in the Watchtower about that.
Nothing in the Watchtower. And is there anything in the statement that Garvey's quoting here about that? Because Garvey's quoting this Der Spiegel article. Is this quote from the Der Spiegel article stating that? Der Spiegel's trying to give the whole story. That's Frost there. But Garvey's saying, oh no, Der Spiegel's twisting the situation. Garb is trying to defend Watchtower. And he's saying the people who are attacking Watchtower are completely taking the historical facts. They're distorting them. And one of his examples of this distortion is, he says, the historical facts were distorted in the way Watchtower Society is often accused of doing. Here's his evidence for the distortion. Pay very close attention to this evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Frost's persecution was described by Der Spiegel in the following words. Here's the quote. Now pay attention to the quote.
Mm-hmm.
Following interrogations by the Gestapo, Frost was allowed to exchange his prison cell for forced labor. Then he was released and later temporarily in Sachsenhausen concentration camp during the war. And finally he landed in SS Construction Brigade offshore from France on the rocky island of Alderney. Right, that's the end of the quote. So this is Garb's response to the quote from the article. What cynical language was allowed? He was released and he was allowed, and temporarily, he was temporarily at a camp.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so he's saying this is cynical language. Not only were the notorious camps depicted here as harmless, and the continuous concentration camp of internment of Frost until the end of the war denied, I don't see that what is saying.
Mm-hmm.
But history was openly falsified. Alderney was a satellite camp, right? The alleged release from the Gestapo refers to the customary release after serving a judicially ordered sentence after 1937, and for non-recanting JWs, their subsequent remand or transfer to concentration camps. In fact, Frost had not spent one single day in freedom after his arrest on March 21st, 1937. I don't see that here.
In Der Spiegel.
In Der Spiegel.
Okay, Der Spiegel, my slide is in German.
Yeah. All right. Here's the other statement from Der Spiegel. This is the second paragraph of Garbe. Since 1961, referring to the Spiegel article, the so-called betrayal by leading Jehovah's Witness Frost and Frank has been alluded to time and time again. In the GDR documentation from 1969, it stated that Frost, without any apparent inducement by the Gestapo, let alone because of beatings, began to talk of his own volition. However, Frost, and there's no reason to doubt his statements after all, we have learned from the archives, was severely tortured, beaten into unconsciousness, and revived with buckets of water during interrogations at the Gestapo headquarters. So he's trying to soft pedal this, is what I understand from that paragraph.
So what does Der Spiegel say?
All right.
Mine's in German.
Now we're going to go to the article that Frost wrote.
Okay, you're highlighting what's in the article. Okay.
I'm highlighting what's in the article to make it easy. Things happened quickly. The Gestapo knew of our plan to meet that Friday for the memorial, but they did not know where. More than once, they beat me into unconsciousness. Okay, that's correct. That's what he's saying. Then poured water over my head to revive me. Soon I was unable to lie down or sit. From Friday to Monday, I hardly ate or drank, but kept calling on Jehovah to help me keep silent for the sake of the brothers. When brought before the Gestapo gang again, I thought of Daniel in the lion's den. Their angry flood of words revealed what I was anxious to hear. The police dragnet had failed to catch the brothers. My joy was indescribable. Okay, so this is his statement in the article. We know there's something going on that some are claiming Frost turned in his brothers, right?
Yeah, I'm seeing the connection there. Go ahead.
All right. So now let's look at the Nazi documentation. Notice who signed that document.
Frost.
Frost signed it. Here's a translation of it. Of the brothers who met me, the lower villages in Munich, with an unknown sister to me, whose first name was Gertrude. I remember that Gertrude is the same person as Alfred's lure from Munich. I assume so, but I don't have a more concrete reason for this. And we talked about Gertrude in our Stand Firm discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, she was working with Frost.
Mm-hmm.
Bonner works in Prague in the office of the IBSA. Joseph, first suited in German, estimated to be 34 years old. Bonner is constantly traveling with the IBSA in Czechoslovakia. His place of residence is in Brunn, in the CSR, street unknown. What do you see that he's doing here?
He's turning in his brothers.
Yeah. And he signed it.
Wow.
Now,
and this came from where? That letter came
this
from
this is from the German archives, from the Nazi archives. This letter is from the Nazi archives. That's what Der Spiegel's referencing. So I'm fact checking the Der Spiegel article, right?
And again, to put it in perspective, what year's that letter?
This is 1937.
Okay, so then he tells the Watchtower a different story.
He tells the Watchtower, the police dragnet had failed to catch the brothers. My joy was indescribable.
And they
Yet
beat
this letter he signed, he's listing all their names and telling them everywhere they're at.
And the other evidence shows a few days later, they arrested over 1,000 of the brothers.
Yeah. So now think about that 1974 yearbook, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was several months later. They're catching him one by one. They know everything about him.
That's what I was pointing at. So
Yeah.
That by the yearbook, they're talking, and I thought the yearbook said a few days later, they caught 1,000 of them.
That one's, I don't remember the time difference, but there's a time difference between.
Gotcha.
But they're turning each other in.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I think Garby's right here. Garby is very carefully, he mentions what Frost mentions here. They were tortured. I think he gave the information and signed it under duress.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be fair, I think that's the only way I can understand this. So if I'm going to be fair with the evidence here, he talks about the duress he was put in, and we have the document here that he did do. So this is Berlin, April 2nd, 1937. Erich Frost appeared, born at Leipzig without a permanent residence. I'm now 36 years old. Basically, he talks about Balzarit, who we were talking about before, Winkler, and he mentions several people by names and who they're overseers for. He even said that there's going to be a conference in Lucerne, that was in Lucerne, and that this is the reorganization. So he mentions them by name. So I don't think Garb is looking at this completely honestly.
No.
I think he's trying to defend the guy.
Yeah. Okay, I see.
But
Now that you're tying it in from
yeah,
there, I see what you're talking about. With that said, yeah, it is, and it even says negotiated
yeah.
on it. So how do you get out of that one?
So now let's go look at Penton's book. Now we got the evidence that Penton's talking about. We saw Garba's criticism of Penton.
Mhm.
Now let's look at how Penton describes this. Because now I think we have a bigger picture, a better understanding of what's going on. Seemingly embarrassing facts begin to come out about one of Watchtower's principal German leaders, Erich Frost, as early as 1961. In that year, the Watchtower published an autobiographical statement by Frost, the Society's former post-war German branch overseer, in which he recounted his persecution by the Nazis. Not surprisingly, this article, in it, Frost portrayed himself as totally faithful to both his religious principles and his brethren. That doesn't seem to match the documentation that we've seen. So in his own words, he was like Daniel in the lion's den.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly thereafter, however, the German news magazine Der Spiegel claimed that after his arrest in March 1937, he had betrayed a number of his witness subordinates and their secret meeting places to the Gestapo.
And the German documentation letters show just that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so some of these books, such as Garbe or even Die Zeugen Jehovah's, right? There's a book that was published in East Germany. Manfred Gerhard is listed as its author. In fact, it was produced by a ghostwriter, Dieter Pape, under the direction of the Ministry of State Security. Its obvious purpose was to discredit Jehovah's Witnesses as allies of the United States and enemies of communism. Undoubtedly, some of its statements in it are exaggerations or outright distortions. For example, it tries nonsensically to tie the Watchtower Society and Jehovah's Witnesses to Western imperialism, capitalism, and psychological warfare against communism. Right? And so, if we go down a little bit further, strikingly, the book's documentation includes several paragraphs from Frost's 1961 article in German. Der Spiegel's attempted expose of Frost and photocopies of Gestapo documents that verify some of the statements made in the expose. Unfortunately, because of its pro-Marxist interpretation of much of Witness's behavior, and because it fails to concede that Watchtower officials such as Winkler, Frost, and Frank may have divulged information only under torture, or at least extreme duress, it has been regarded as an unfair piece of propaganda. So that's what Garby's referencing, right? He's talking about this propaganda piece that other, the communist German government's trying to put out and completely misconstruing the facts. And so Penton in this case has it right according to the documentation we have on file.
Now, did Penton have access to the letters? Is that where he confirmed
Yes.
his information from? Okay, so
Correct. Yep.
that was the shortcut.
Yeah. But I think when he wrote the book, this was, I don't think it was available publicly as it is now. A lot of these things are all online now. So you can actually go get it and translate it yourself and see, does the documented facts fit the evidence for what's described? And I think the Der Spiegel article is correct. I think the Penton's correct because it seems to fit what we have listed there. Frost signed it. He gave the information.
And then, I mean, that's kind of by you ask a soldier what they would think of a soldier who gave up their comrades and then came back and acted like they were a hero. That's considered a very, very, very low thing to do.
Yeah. And so has his book again. Dietrich Hellman has a treatise as well, and it's talking about the Stand Firm film. He mentions the story as well, but I like how he says it here. He says, Frost deserves our compassion, not our contempt, based on understanding because of his many services for Watchtower Society. Who is there among us who could say, I could resist the torture of the Gestapo? By the way, in the case of Frost, we have testimony from a survivor, as a historical document it is worn out, who would swear that this is only an isolated example? So even some of the scholars recognize that this probably happened because of torture.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been nice if, Frost had been a little more honest with his own history.
But how do you live with something like that?
Yeah.
There are people. I'll share a story. I know personally in the past a soldier in Vietnam who was a friend of the family. And when you hear from other things how it went, he was responsible because he failed to do something, and a lot of the men in their platoon, their group, got killed. He's in denial about it. You tell he's tortured, but he's trying to go on with life with that failure in his mind. Was it his fault? No, it was circumstances. That it's like you're the kicker for the football team. It's an even score. Your kick, when the clock runs out, could make the touchdown, but it goes off to the side. That's not, you can't be perfect at every given moment. And that's the same thing. So, I'm going to feel a little compassion for Frost, yet at the same time, knowing Watchtower history, I mean, I wouldn't print in a magazine that I was the hero. I might not talk about it or say, well, of what, but I wouldn't print an article where I came out to be the hero.
Maybe he didn't think somebody would try and fact check him.
But
maybe he didn't think someone would find the Nazi document.
Knowing that yourself, you wouldn't want to.
But maybe he didn't know someone would find the Nazi documents. Maybe he never told Watchtower that.
And in defense of Watchtower, they may not have known this. And maybe it, assuming he was telling the truth.
Maybe he did tell them, and they told him, "Don't put that in there."
Maybe
they revised his work. There could be any number of reasons.
Yeah.
But his story doesn't match the documented facts.
Mm-hmm.
His own personal story. But there's more to his story.
Okay.
We're not done with Frost yet.
Okay. We're going to burn Frost. Frostbite.
All right. So Garby again. Garby.
Go back to Garby's book on Frost.
All right. So besides Erich Frost, two other former leaders of the IBSA branch in Germany, Paul Bosereit, again, and Fritz Winkler, were imprisoned at Sachsenhausen. The SS used the disagreements and conflicts attached to these leaders regarding the IBSA course to trigger divisions in the Bible student group. For example, the SS used the former leader of the Watchtower Society's branch office in Germany, Paul Bosereit, who had been in prison in 1937, to present to him the Bible students as an example worth following because he had abandoned his faith. Even though Bosereit had signed the statement, that's the declaration that will let them out, I renounce my faith, he wasn't released from Sachsenhausen. Remember, we talked about that story.
Yeah, that was the article I was referring to about 15 minutes ago.
Right, so until more than 1 year later, the Bible student group generally avoided him. Remember, they ostracized the guy. Erich Frost, however, who had been transferred to Sachsenhausen at the beginning of 1941 after having served a prison sentence of 3.5 years, maintained his position of authority in the camp. And he's the one that turned his brothers in.
Maybe they, obviously they didn't know. I would think they obviously didn't know.
So he was one of the spokesmen of the group of the Bible student prisoners. Once, as a result of Bible discourses he gave at Bible student barracks, he was sent to the punishment battalion and given 25 strokes with a club on the infamous rack. Eventually, however, Frost's situation, as well as that of his fellow believers, improved considerably. The SS used the former music director from Leipzig to provide the musical background for their sociable evenings. All right? And so what did Garby... So remember, this is Garby, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is Garby arguing about in the previous article we looked at? He's saying, well, they didn't get it easier. And here, in this article, he is saying he did get it easier. It improved for them. So Garby's contradicting himself.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, he's saying, what's cynical language? He didn't have it better. And here he's saying, oh, he got it better. I see that as a contradiction.
Yep.
All right, so after their liberation in 1945, the Buchenwald Bible Student Group laid claim to the leadership of the German IBSA branch office. In the end, they finally came to a friendly agreement. The divisions were resolved, and both parties continued to work shoulder to shoulder in the preaching activity, although, according to one person, some of the wounds remained. Notice this paragraph. Who does it sound like the author of this paragraph is? Doesn't it sound like a Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah.
And he's not a Jehovah's Witness, but I think it shows
He's not
the influence. He's not a Jehovah's Witness, but I think it shows the influence of those who financed his work. Right? Because he was financed by the Simone Leipster Foundation, according to Penton. Remember that footnote from...
Oh, yes.
More on Frost.
By Anti-Ziger.
Anti-Ziger. And also has his book. Erich Frost, department head of the German International Bible Students Association, 39 years old, a concert pianist and composer, also was taken to Sachsenhausen. In 1940, at the request of his fellow brethren, Frost composed a marching song and other pieces of music. This song with different words is still in the Witnesses' Songbook today. And we had talked about that in our previous discussion when we talked about Frost. But here we're getting more of his story and some of the details and the documentation from the Nazi archives, directly from the Nazi archives. So the 74-year book says, after Brother Frank's arrest, he had taken over his territory, but he felt responsible for the other unoccupied territories as well. So he asked Sister Schneider to deliver spiritual food to the brothers. Brother Wanderers, realizing that the enemy had been especially furious in Saxony, asked Herman to care for this territory. On September 3rd, both of them traveled to Dresden. Although Brother Wanderers had never been there before, the Gestapo was waiting for them there. Again, they're being turned in. A manhunt that had lasted for 3 years was over.
And the irony of it, it's going back to the Watchtower versus going back to the letters, going back to Watchtower's printing that they got turned in, not realizing that the 61 article written by the guy was the one who turned them all in, and they write about it in 74.
All right, so towards the middle of September, we'll continue here. In harmony with arrangements made with Brother Wanderers, unsuspecting Paula, and they have that in quotes, was waiting at the railroad station in Blingen with 2 large suitcases full of literature. Suddenly, a gentleman approached her and said, "Good day, Paula. Albert's not coming, and you will have to go along with me." It was useless trying to resist, for the stranger was a Gestapo agent. He added, "You need not wait for Albert. We've already arrested him and have taken all his money. Mr. Wanderers said that you would be here with 2 large suitcases, and here you are, Paula. It's a mystery until this day where the Gestapo got the information, but this was a popular method of the Gestapo, that is, claiming certain brothers had said certain things as to break down the confidence among the brothers, causing them to withdraw from such traitors."
And again, going back to the 61 Watchtower written by Frost.
There's an example, yeah.
I mean, yeah. Wow.
And how else would they get the information? Because they're only going to tell...
Jeff, this was a good catch to find all that intertwining. Now,
wait. But how would they even know, right? Because they're only going to tell their brothers, I'm going to be there with 2 big suitcases. Mm-hmm. It had to be one of the brethren that turned it in, right?
Well, and here is one more irony of all this. Okay. The guy coming to meet Albert coming to meet Paula had money. So they were still selling the books during the war. They weren't like just secretly giving them away. And it took a suitcase full of money to buy the book. Oh man. Oh. It's comical.
It's sad and
Rutherford
comical,
was
isn't it?
getting his cut even from Germans under persecution. You know, it's like, hey, I got Beth Surin to take care of. I don't care what your problems are. You just sell these books. Oh, man.
Oh, good night.
Jeff, that was a good piecework of detective work.